Hello, it is Thursday, September 12th. My name is Zach Barnett. With me is Doug Samuels and John Bryce. Scott Roussel is not here. He is dealing with the aftermath of Hurricane Beryl. Thankfully, Baton Rouge seemed to get the best of what they were expecting, but he is not here. And time waits for no man, and neither does the Football Scoop podcast. So we roll on. Gentlemen, how are we doing?
Nice intro, Zach, and glad that glad that Scott seems to have dodged the most of it, other than maybe having enough rain to overflow his pool.
So the news of the day, the news of the morning, is that the Pac-2 has become the Pac-6. Washington State and Oregon State and the carcass of the Pac-12 brand have officially invited and accepted Boise State, Colorado State, San Diego State, and Fresno State to join their club. Let's start off here. What's our general reaction to this news?
JB, you go ahead, man.
All right. Well, we're going to have the six-pack conference. So that's my first thought, is that we now have a conference named the six-pack. The pack is desperate. Money talks. I'll be curious to see what the money actually is shaking out of this. I'll be curious to see these teams finding the funding to pay their exit fees from the Mountain West. I know there's some reporting out there that the pack will help pay that because of the money that they kept from revenue distributions for the teams that just fled their league. So, it's a last gasp, almost reminds me of some of the things the NCAA is doing, because it's a last gasp at relevancy. It doesn't really move the needle one way or the other for me, honestly.
I think the question is, why couldn't have this been done as the Pac-12 was crumbling? Like, why couldn't we have made a push for it at that point? Because I mean, the Pac-12 was dead and buried, and now it's got its hand crunching through the crumbling earth. Like, hey, we're still alive. We've added these teams. So that's my first question. My second question, Zach and I talked a little bit about this before we hopped on, was if the Pac-6 comes back, or they add another two teams, whether that's UTSA and Memphis, or somehow get Cal and Stanford back into the mix, what constitutes a power conference like tag? I think that's a philosophical question. Everyone's going to have a different answer, but I'm intrigued to hear your guys' take.
I think the on the ground answer is no. From what I've read, they've lost their quote unquote autonomy designation, and so they are not going to be a quote unquote power. The Power Four will stay the Power Four, will not become the Power Five again. In terms of the playoff, it doesn't really matter, because now they just take the top five conference champions. There's not, as of now, a specifically reserved spot for the SEC, ACC, and Big 12 champion, and there won't be one for the Pac-6. But in terms of how we think about the conference, I think it's still it'll be, I guess, a group of six now, because there's power in that name and those three letters, although the numbers have changed over the year. It started as the Pac-8, then was the Pac-10, Pac-12, now Pac-6, whatever. But if the SEC, if the biggest brand in the SEC was somehow, I don't know, it was Vanderbilt, Kentucky, and Middle Tennessee wearing the SEC logo, I wouldn't say that's a power conference anymore either.
Yeah, I just don't think it's look, it helps all the six of those teams perhaps moving forward on scheduling, particularly on the gridiron, but I don't think, again, it does anything to substantiate those programs more so than if they were Mountain West programs still, or if Oregon State and Washington State had joined the Mountain West, rather than trying to get these four programs to join the six pack. And then furthermore, Cal and Stanford were so worried about being left in the wind a year ago when all this was blowing apart, that they cashed in a lot of favors to finally get accepted into the ACC. And the ACC was a little bit hesitant at first, and Notre Dame officials particularly went to bat to get Cal and Stanford into the ACC, to have 7 of the 8 top research institutions or something like that all married into one league, So for Cal and Stanford, what do they do now? I think it's fascinating, that component of it, because I do think the travel is ridiculous that these teams are incorporating now. But I don't think it's a real groundbreaking move in the big picture. I completely agree with you all. It doesn't. This 6-pack conference is not going to suddenly get an automatic bid in the 12-team playoff moving forward.
I think in order to be considered a Power 4 team, you've got to have, I want to say, at least 2 teams in your conference that are national title contenders. And if somehow the ACC loses Florida State and Clemson down the road, like do they still deserve the Power 4 moniker? Does it turn into the Power 3 at that point? So I think that for me in my head, that's the way I sorted out, and the addition of these teams with Washington State and Oregon State, I don't think hits that for me. So it's us that decide it, right? It's media, it's people that decide that moniker. It's not anything. It's not an official designation by any stretch. But I don't think the addition of these 4 teams with the previous Pac-2 check that box for me.
Yeah, ultimately it boils down to middle school lunchroom dynamics. The popular table isn't popular because of the table. It's popular because of where the kids sit. If USC and Oregon and Washington and UCLA rejoin the Pac-6, it'd become a power conference again because it has the quote unquote cool kids. Unfortunately, a consequence of no one being in charge of college sports is that the Big Ten, I wouldn't say it got worse, but it became stupider now that it's the Big 18 and stretching out 4 time zones. The ACC got worse. The Pac-12 got worse. The Mountain West is going to get worse. And now the AAC, the Big Sky, whoever, they're going to get worse. And there's no one in charge to say, let's work collegiately and make the entire product better, even if your conference may not get any better. It's an unfortunate reality of college sports. And let's segue into the games here. And it just so happens on this day of good news for Oregon State and Washington State that at 2:30 God's time, they're going to take on their in-state rivals. Oregon State gets Oregon and Washington State gets Washington in Seattle. Do we give Oregon, the states, Oregon State, Washington State, a chance to win either of those games?
I would say Washington State, in my opinion, has a better shot against Washington than Oregon State has against Oregon. I don't think we've seen great Oregon performances either of the first 2 weeks, but I still think this is a very good to elite Oregon roster that's been assembled. And so I think that the Ducks will fly all over the Beavers on Saturday. I do think from what we've seen from the Cougs, and Jake Dickert has done a nice job kind of holding things together there. I'm not picking either of those teams to win, but if I was forced to pick one, I believe Wazoo has the better shot at the upset in those fabulous interstate rivalries.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think we had the same conversation last year, different staffs at Washington. We have a different conversation, but with all the turnover there, the roster turnover, the coaching turnover that's happened there, it's not last year's Washington squad by a long stretch. And I think I would agree with JB. I think Wazoo's got the best shot in that one. I think Oregon is still, again, finding out who they are, and through these first 2 weeks haven't been impressive by any stretch. But in terms of roster talent, they're one of the most talented rosters in college football. Just a matter of when are they going to put it all together? Not if they put it all together. It'll be a win. When they start clicking, it's going to get scary.
Is it not a red flag for you guys that, we talked about A-League Terry, the Oregon offensive line coach, who had everyone wear shirts of 2.9 or whatever yards per carry they ran against Idaho, and then they came out and weren't explosive, maybe improved, but not dramatically improved against Boise State, a team that in theory they should be able to run all over. I mean, from Oregon so far has been playing left-handed, and I mean that literally. Their left-handed quarterback, Dylan Gabriel, almost all of their throws go to the left side of the field. It's something you believe they should be able to fix, but he doesn't have the strongest arm, and Oregon has not been explosive in the pass game or the run game, and it's tough to win games in college football if you can't be explosive.
Yeah, I think that he hasn't been able to push the ball downfield whatsoever, and that's to me one of the biggest root causes of why the Oregon ground attack has not been overly efficient or as effective as what we would have expected, particularly in weeks 1 and 2. Now, I'm a big Jason Eck fan. Idaho is an elite FCS team now under Eck, and proved that how well they played Oregon was no fluke when they went and won against Wyoming. So still, Oregon should have been able to control it, and it is concerning because they're just not able to stretch the field. I think you made the point, Zach, after his debut, how great his Dylan Gabriel's numbers were as an Oregon quarterback, but that his average per attempt was really short. His average per completion, I mean, he had 41 completions and didn't have 400 yards passing, which is not really what you would expect.
All right, let's back it up. To me, one of the games of the weekend, I can make a case the big game or the most fun game, the must-see game of the weekend is tonight, and that is the 2-0 Arizona State Sun Devils taking on the 2-0 Texas State Bobcats. Texas State is well-renowned as a party school, and oftentimes that means the party is in Austin or San Antonio. But tonight, after blowing out rival UTSA last week at home, the party at Texas State is going to be in the student section of Bobcat Stadium. This is the biggest game Texas State's probably ever had. They've played for FCS semifinals in the past, but they have ESPN in town, a Big 12 opponent in town with a team that looks to be pretty darn good. Do we give Arizona State an upset warning tonight?
I think G.J. Kinney and that Texas State offense are always going to be able to score points for as long as he's there, which might only be this season if things continue to trend upward. But they've been explosive on offense, one of the most explosive offenses in college football. I think my tip of the cap goes to Kenny Dillingham and his staff. New offensive coordinator there that's been super organized and really impressive through the first 2 weeks. They ran whenever they wanted to against a Mississippi State defense last week. I expect them to ground and pound again this week and keep the ball on the ground. But also Texas State has a top 20 rush defense in college football right now. So will they be able to match up with the SEC like Mississippi State? I don't think so. So I think this game is going to be close. I think it's going to be exciting. It's there's not a lot of games on today. I think this is the only college football game on tonight. So it'll be a full screen event for me at our JV game. I'll be up in the box watching our game and this game, trying to do double duty.
I love the ability to multitask there, Doug. You get live football and then you get football on the digital screen in front of you. Very well done. I think Texas State certainly has an opportunity because of what the atmosphere is going to be. I do think that Kenny Dillingham and company are poised for a significant step forward this year at Arizona State. I noticed the line has been around Arizona State -1.5, -2. It's now, I think, trickled more towards a pick'em kind of contest for me. The over-under is intriguing. It's a 60-point over-under or thereabouts. I think I would definitely take the over. I think this ends up being an incredibly exciting offensive-minded game between two really bright, young, offensive-minded head coaches.
As you guys mentioned, Arizona State ran for 359 to 30, something like that, against Mississippi State, behind Cam Scatabo, one of those great college football names and players. If you're Arizona State, you got to figure you're going to see if that advantage carries over, and then you're going to press that advantage for as long as you can. I'd love to see Texas State win, but I'll probably take Arizona State. I usually tell Scott we just need to skip over the weeknight games and get straight to Saturday. However, it's a testament to how good these weeknight games are and how lame the Saturday slate is that, again, we got two great matchups Friday night. UNLV at Kansas, 6 o'clock Central ESPN game, and then one of the two ranked matchups of the weekend I believe it's a Big 12 game that doesn't count for the Big 12 standings, number 20 Arizona and number 14 Kansas State in the Wildcat Bowl. Which game are you looking forward to more?
I've got to go with Kansas because that was my bold prediction team going into the season that they would make the college football playoff and play for the Big 12, all of that. So not a conference game, but Kansas lost a non-conference game last week against Illinois with the Illini kind of able to control things on the ground. UNLV obviously ran roughshod over a Houston team opening things up this season. And that was a Houston team that turned around the very next week and had a shot to upset Oklahoma in the second half. For Kansas continue on the upward arc that it's been on under Lance Leipold, building new facilities, new fan interest, selling more football tickets than ever before. This is a game that could really be detrimental to the image of the program if the Jayhawks can't win it. So I like Kansas in this game. I do think it'll be a good game, but I think Kansas pulls away in the second half and wins double digits.
I think the last time I watched intently a UNLV game was Tony Sanchez's maybe debut game. I wanted to see the high school to college jump. Now with Barry Odom leading the program and Brennan Marion calling the offense, the go-go offense, I feel like UNLV Friday night for most people that aren't coaching in a game or playing in a game on Friday night, that's must-watch TV. You've got two exciting offenses, two really good head coaches, two really good offensive coordinators. I think UNLV keeps us close. I don't think Kansas pulls away in this one. I think Kansas is not quite reeling, but they're getting close there, where they don't want to slide. So I think UNLV keeps it close. I think Brennan Marion and the offense continue to roll and keep things rolling. And as they get into their conference slate, are going to be the team to beat.
I agree with Doug. I like Kansas, but close. Arizona, huge opportunity for them. The preseason favorites in that conference seemed to be most everyone was taking Utah or Kansas State, and a huge opportunity for them to go in there and announce themselves as perhaps the Big 12 favorite. Moving to Saturday, we have two games that are in the big TV windows, but I don't know how excited. I don't know what the juice level is. Alabama at Wisconsin, and then that's big noon kickoff on Fox, and then LSU, South Carolina. JB, which of those games are you more interested to watch?
LSU, South Carolina. Shane Beamer saying this week on the SEC coaches call, and it was really just to make sure that his team was being focused, but saying that, they got a win last week and the bandwagon is getting full. We know that Brian Kelly threw his little pseudo fit after the loss to USC and punched the table and did all of that. This is a low-key, high-stakes game very early in the season for Brian Kelly and LSU. It's year 3. He overachieved in year 1. He had a Heisman winner last year, but wasn't a playoff contender, didn't play in the SEC championship game, lost some games he didn't need to lose last year that give you equity. So Brian Kelly, this is a really, really critical game early in Brian Kelly's LSU tenure.
Yeah, for me, it's Wisconsin and Alabama. I think if we see that same Alabama team that showed up for the first 3 quarters against South Florida, Wisconsin's got a shot, but Wisconsin hasn't been overly impressive as one of my early season candidates to be an outside shot at making the college football playoff. I think that's Nebraska in the Big Ten now through these first 2 weeks. Wisconsin's first 2 games have been almost identical scores, 28-14 over Western Michigan to open the season, and then 27-13 last week. So you're going to see a huge jump in talent on the field from South Dakota, with all due respect to them, to what Alabama is going to bring. So I would love to see Phil Longo and that Badger offense get on track. I'm a big Phil Longo fan. Think he's one of the best play callers in college football. But they're going to have a big test this week, and then next week doesn't get any easier with a possible top 10 USC team coming into town. They're ranked number 11 right now, so they've got a tough stretch here where we're going to find out who Luke Fickell and the Badgers are in year 2.
Yeah, we're both big fans of Phil Longo. You'd like to see them. Alabama gave South Florida opportunities to throw the ball down the field against them, and South Florida wasn't able to take advantage. Certainly, Phil Longo will see those and be able to, you'd think, scheme up similar opportunities for Wisconsin, but I don't have a lot of faith right now that Wisconsin can actually complete those. If they can consistently do it against South Dakota, how are you going to do it against Alabama? The other big game is this. Let's move to 2:30 God's time. To me, this is the must-watch game of the entire day in a lot of ways, and that's Texas A&M at Florida. We could see. I don't expect any movement here, but it's no secret Billy Napier's status. His seat is scorching, and if they lose their second straight game, I know they beat Samford at home, but their first two real games to open the season, both of them at home. If they were to lose this to a year one Texas A&M game, it could put Napier so far behind the eight ball he wouldn't be able to catch up. What are the keys to this game, boys?
Well, it's Billy Napier coming out and saying that Graham Mertz will start, and that's interesting, but it sounds like both quarterbacks will play. I think that if you're Napier, you've got to start finding things to try and build and point to, and DJ Lagway looked capable of potentially being a guy that you could seek to begin to build your offensive identity around. And Graham Mertz has been a nice player, but he has not elevated Florida. So you're right. This is much, once again, just like the Miami game was to open the season. It means far more that Napier not lose than it does Elko. It would kind of be what I call an ahead of the curve win for Elko in perception anyway. If A&M is able to go on the road and beat Florida this early in the season, then obviously this early in Mike Elko's tenure.
Yeah, the next 2 weeks after this, you've got Mississippi State and Central Florida for Billy Napier. I would feel a lot better for Napier if this was year two and he wasn't on a hot seat and he's playing a freshman quarterback. You feel pretty good, but to play a freshman quarterback or a young quarterback in the situation that he's in, these must-win situations. I could see him dropping this week and then winning the next two, and then you're sitting at 3-2, and that seat's getting a little bit cooler. But then you've got Tennessee, Kentucky, who didn't have a good outing last week, but then Georgia and Texas, the number 1 and 2 teams in the country. It's a rough start, but if he loses this one, I don't think it's the end of the world. I don't think AD's got a itchy trigger finger, but the next 2 weeks are very winnable games to get him to 3-2.
To me, the game within this game is DJ Lagway, and not only does he give Florida a better chance, or perhaps its only chance to win a game it desperately needs to win, but it's going to be the elephant in this room is DJ Lagway and the potential of him hitting the portal after the season. And I hate to be that guy who views still a budding college football season through the eyes of, I'll just wait for the portal. But at the same time, you have a 5-star, number 1 recruit in the country, number 1 quarterback in the country, true freshman with plenty of years of eligibility to have him playing for a hot seat coach. And I have to imagine the transfer market for DJ Lagway, if and when Billy Napier gets let go, is going to be as hot as any quarterback we've seen in this young transfer portal era. And then you have Texas A&M, who has a, let's say, inconsistent quarterback in Connor Wegman. Lagway's from Willis, Texas, an hour from College Station. It's going to be interesting to see if this comes up on the broadcast at all, because it's too glaring to ignore the opportunity of DJ Lagway potentially being an Aggie this time next season.
Well, and we know that A&M is.
Let's move on. Sorry. Go ahead, JB.
I was just going to say, we know A&M is willing to spend deep in the NIL game to assemble a roster. So you make a good point. We could probably host an entire podcast on the fact that freshman playing time is suddenly becoming a more pressing topic earlier than ever before because of the portal. And that's from talks with coaches this week. But anyway.
JB, we'll turn this over to you. Staying in that mid-afternoon window on CBS, we have for some reason, still ranked number 18 Notre Dame at Purdue. What are the keys to this game?
Who plays quarterback for Notre Dame? Is Riley Leonard able to go? He's got an injury in his left non-throwing shoulder. He's still been trying to practice some this week, but Marcus Freeman due to talk with the media for the final time before the game a little bit later today here on Thursday. Can Notre Dame establish and stick with its run? And then the Notre Dame defense, can it get off the field? Gave up almost 400 yards last week, one of the worst outings it's had in 3 seasons under Al Golden, who has been an elite defensive coordinator, but did not have an elite day last Saturday afternoon. It's as close to a must-win game, again, early in Marcus Freeman's tenure as you can possibly get. All the equity that Freeman and company generated from that opening game win at Texas A&M now is, defaulted with this loss to Northern Illinois. The 4th loss, I think this is key. It's the 4th loss that Marcus Freeman has suffered at home of his 9 losses in which his team is led in the 4th quarter. So 4 of 9 losses with a lead at home in the 4th quarter. That's a pretty damning statistic for the way that Notre Dame has or has not been able to close out games at home under Marcus Freeman.
Wow.
I think one of the things that doesn't get talked about, and I've been to a couple Notre Dame games, but to have a loud, raucous crowd late in the 4th quarter when you're hanging on to a tight lead is underrated. And Notre Dame just isn't one of those stadiums that shakes you to your core late in the 4th quarter. It's I don't know whether it's an older fan base or what the story is there, but they just don't have the same buzz as a lot of places late in the game. So while Marcus Freeman deserves some heat for that, that stadium environment is also a culprit in that storyline.
Yeah, it was. I would say the 4th quarter atmosphere was really good last year against Ohio State in a game that Notre Dame came from ahead to lose. And then I think you could. You're right. Like it doesn't compare to a Penn State or a College Station a couple of weeks ago, or any number of outposts in the SEC. I also don't think you should need your crowd to help you beat Northern Illinois, Marshall, or the Stanford team that got David Shaw fired either. But those are the other 3 games that Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame have lost when leading in the 4th quarter at home.
Doug, I'm curious, how would you, if you're Marcus Freeman, you're coming off a terrific road win to open the season, you follow it up with a horrendous home loss. How do you approach your staff and your team this week as you put that loss behind you, and at the same time you brace for week 1 of what's now a new season where you probably have to win every single game to make the playoff?
Well, the good news is I think their schedule is pretty favorable. I think they can win out and just have this one black eye on their schedule. But from a coaching perspective, like for Marcus Freeman, number one, you can't hit the panic button. Did an article yesterday afternoon on Thomas Hammock after that loss, kind of extends the olive branch. Hey man, anything we can do to help you guys out? We'll tell you what we saw on film to help you improve for the rest of the year. Number one, credit to Thomas Hammock for doing that. But number 2, it takes a special individual with no ego to kind of swallow your pride and be like, hey, I'm going to find out everything I can on why we lost and make sure that doesn't happen again. I don't think that there's probably, I don't want to say a handful of coaches in major college football, but the coaching profession is full of egos. So for someone to say that, and then, on the other side for Marcus Freeman to take advantage of that and have a couple phone conversations and learn where you came up short or what you were showing on film so that it can be fixed. I think both those guys deserve a ton of credit. But not pressing the panic button, swallowing your ego a little bit and moving forward that way. And also, I think staying the course. I think the worst thing you can do in this situation is decide we have to blow everything up and start all over. No, still be process oriented, which I know Marcus Freeman's talked time after time about being process oriented. But going back and kind of hammering in on the little details, maybe where things went wrong during last week, because that game wasn't necessarily lost on Saturday. That game was lost Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. How did practice go Monday through Friday? So the worst thing you can do in that situation, press the panic button and say, we've got to change everything. And now you've lost 90% of your roster because you're like, what are these dudes talking about? You've got to have faith in why you got the job. the process and the systems you have in place, and double down on those to show that, hey, we've got things in place for a reason. We need to follow it a little bit better.
Do you go in there when you're in film study and meetings with the team and even with the staff? Do you go in there and make the paint peel with letting them know how pathetic and unacceptable it was, or do you realize these guys know I don't need to reinforce how bad losing at home to Northern Illinois is? Do you try and take the opposite approach and build them back up?
I think you have to have a balance and do a little bit of both. Like you got to pull up the film and say, here's what we did wrong. You've also got to pull up the film and say, here are the things we did right. And if we did that consistently, we're having a different conversation right now. But the inconsistency is what led to that loss.
Great stuff, Doug. Moving on. We have a couple in-state rival, or not in-state, but we have another rivalry game in that window. West Virginia at Pittsburgh. Cade Bell, one of the underrated hires of this past offseason. So far, the early returns are extremely positive. They hit 55, 52 on Kent State, 28 points on Cincinnati, which they only did one time against the Power 4 opponent last season, against a West Virginia team, or at least a West Virginia defense that's struggling so far. Who are you liking that one, JB?
I like Pitt. I think the way that Pitt showed a lot of resolve to come back last week from down, I think 21-6 early in the game on the road at Cincinnati, and found a way to win, kicking a field goal late. They tried to tie it at 27-all, failed the 2-point conversion, got a key defensive stop, kicked the game-winning field goal. Maybe with 17 seconds left on the road. That's an old Big East series there, Pitt and Cincinnati. This also is an old Big East former Big East tale between Pitt and West Virginia. The backyard brawl, those two schools are incredibly close to one another geographically. So there's absolutely no love lost. It will be an intense scene Saturday in Pittsburgh, but I just think Pittsburgh is getting some really nice play in the back end of its defense. It's always very stout up front on the defensive line. Holstein has been growing, as you alluded to, under Cade Bell as the offensive coordinator. And so I just think this is Pittsburgh because it's at home and because Pittsburgh has a little more early season momentum than do the Mountaineers.
If you're Neil Brown, it's great to get old rivals Penn State and Pitt on the schedule, but it's not great to lose to both of them. So my professional advice for Neil Brown would be to win this game. I know you don't want to hear that from me. Moving into the evening window on the CW network in between Gilmore Girls reruns, we have number 5 Ole Miss at Wake Forest. This is an Ole Miss team that's ranked obviously 5th. They have absolutely hammered the Little Sisters of the Poor 2 straight weeks to open the season. Their numbers are incredible. Jackson Dart is averaging nearly 15 yards per attempt, but they haven't played anybody. My question for you two, and I'll start with you, Doug, is how good is this Ole Miss team actually, and will Wake Forest reveal how good this team actually is?
To answer the second question first, no, Wake Forest will not be the barometer that we measure this Ole Miss team by. To answer the first question, I need to quote our fearless leader, like, hey, number 4 Ole Miss really has a shot to win it all. All right. So we had to get a Scott quote in there somehow. But the early season slate for Ole Miss isn't really telling us the full truth about this team. We're not gonna learn about that until they get into the meat of their schedule. But Wake Forest gives you some issues schematically with their slow mesh stuff and some of the unique things that they do. So it's a good test for Ole Miss, but I don't think it's by any means the end all be all.
Yeah, Wake Forest has just fallen dramatically, starting with the onset of the 23 season, for all the good that Dave Clawson has done there, and I don't think they're not going to be as bad over the course of this season as they were last year, but they're not going to be as good as what they were in 20, 21, 22. And Virginia is an improved team, but Virginia offensively doesn't remotely compare, in my opinion, to Ole Miss offensively. And we saw Virginia go in there and hang 31 on the Deacs a week ago and win that contest. So I expect Ole Miss to win this contest pretty handily. And yes, the team that began the season ranked number 6 in the preseason polls, both of them will continue to be a potential playoff team with this weekend's win at Wake Forest.
2 games of note in the primetime national window. First up, number 1 Georgia at Kentucky. That's 6:30 Central on ABC. John, is this game going to be as ugly as I'm thinking it's going to be?
I think it'll be as ugly as Georgia decides it wants it to be. I do think Kentucky will perform better than it did last week against South Carolina. But as listless as the Wildcats looked offensively last week and as slow as they looked defensively against South Carolina, I think you'll see it expose that much more, the speed and skill differential between Georgia and Kentucky. This week, it's a night game. Kentucky folks are begging fans to come out and give them an advantage with one of those loud crowds that Doug referred to earlier. I just think Georgia is so superior that it will just sort of systematically dominate and pick apart. If Kentucky didn't muster 190 yards, literally didn't have 190 yards total offense against South Carolina, then Georgia, if it's focused, won't give up 175 or 150 or whatever, unless it's so far ahead that it starts playing some of those younger players that we've made reference to already.
At the same time, we have Colorado at Colorado State. This game was one of the, I don't want to say premier, but one of the key games of the 2023 season in terms of you wouldn't understand it unless you lived it. A Friday night game on ESPN got nearly 10 million viewers between 2 teams that proved to be average to not very good to flat out bad. I don't think either one of these teams are all that improved. In fact, they might be worse. But I'm still going to tune into this game. I guess that's the power of Coach Prime. Doug, who wins?
I think Colorado wins. I don't think it's a fun game to watch. Colorado State being an air raid team that doesn't necessarily run the ball very well against a Colorado team that does not run the ball very well. So I don't think it's going to be a pretty game by any stretch. What we're missing in this game that we had last year that really drew a lot of eyeballs is the chirping back and forth between Jay Norvell and Deion Sanders about the sunglasses and Deion's mom and all that kind of stuff. So that drew significantly more eyeballs. And I don't think this year holds a candle to what we went into that game last year as.
Yeah, I just quickly, the fact that Colorado State is getting to host Colorado on campus for the first time since '96, first time ever in their new stadium that they opened maybe 6 years ago, back when Mike Bobo was head coach. It is a very nice facility. I think it's going to be a really great atmosphere that will help make the game probably appear better than what it is. I expect it to be fairly high scoring. Colorado went into the transfer portal, got Dallin Hayden away from Ohio State at the running back position, has not utilized him, could not run the ball or do anything very effectively last week at Nebraska. I've got the Buffs on upset alert in this game.
That's it as far as our big national games. We don't lie to you here at Football Scoop, so I can't try and say this is a great week in terms of, at least on onset. Well, last week, the slate didn't look great, and we were treated to some fantastic games. Doug, we'll start with you. What's one game that you're going to keep an eye on that we did not mention already?
I feel like in that primetime Eastern slot, which Zach's made 2 God's time references for Central Time, which I take grave offense to.
Central Time is the worst time.
Yeah, and in that nighttime evening slot, there's not a lot of great games, but one game I think deserves to go full screen and not multi-view that I'm going to be watching is Indiana and UCLA. Indiana has scored over 100 points in their first 2 games. Granted, last one was against Western Illinois. They won 77-3 or something like that. But UCLA in the Deshaun Foster era opened with a 16-13 win over Hawaii. I think that was week 0, or week 1. So that's when I'll be watching. If Indiana can open up their Big Ten slate with a win for Kurt Cignetti and that staff, I think is very notable. They've got to travel across the country to UCLA. So does that impact them? But through 2 games, the swag of Cignetti has certainly rubbed off on the Hoosiers, and I for one would love to see that continue.
Yeah, I like. I had somebody asking me about that game yesterday. I think that's a very underrated but potentially very compelling contest. I do think you give the edge in this game to Cignetti and the Hoosiers coaching staff right now. 2 other games that I don't think we mentioned or I completely spaced out, and let me apologize to everyone. Memphis, Florida State is a significant game on Saturday, and Boston College at Missouri is a significant game on Saturday. And I'll start with the latter first. Missouri made a living last year in its first 11-win season in almost a decade by winning all the one-possession games, or almost all of the one-possession games, and really finding success in those super close games that typically break about 50-50. They're a little bit more than a one-possession favorite in this contest, but BOB already had a big win against the Florida State team to start the year. The Eagles are now ranked, which is pretty unheard of skies for them to fly in recent years. And then Memphis, this is Memphis's great opportunity to stamp itself as potential group of 5 front runner for that at-large playoff bid that we know is coming at the end of the year. So those are 2 other games that I think are very interesting in the Saturday slate.
Yes, thank you, John, for bringing those games up, specifically that Memphis-Florida State game. Florida State, if they have a great or even a good performance in them, we're going to see it on Saturday. Mike Norvell should have his team's full attention after starting 0-2. They took last week off. So this should be the best version of whatever this Florida State team is. And so it's a danger zone and also a great opportunity for a Memphis team that's ranked number 1 in the group of 5 coaches poll, but hasn't earned that ranking yet. They haven't really played anybody of note. So this is a great opportunity to stake a claim on a potential playoff bid. Another game I'm keeping an eye on that I should have mentioned earlier, that's Tulane at number 15, Oklahoma. Oklahoma's kind of in a similar boat as Florida State. They're 2-0, but a lot of panic in the fan base, especially after last week's Houston win that felt like a loss. I refuse to believe Oklahoma is as poor as they've shown, particularly in the running game. So this should be a good performance by Oklahoma. At the same time, Tulane, they run that wide zone. They run it really effectively against an Oklahoma defense that we think is elite, but so far they've only played Tipple, Houston, and the Oklahoma offense. So they haven't played a good offense yet. So how good are they really? That's a game definitely to keep an eye on. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll have Scott next time. Everybody have a great weekend.